Catchphrase.
You're just saying that.
Well, welcome to Tri-County Church, and so you know there's Kleenexes everywhere. I might need a box up here, so if you want to just whip one at my head, that would be humorous and good. No, I'm good. No, really, I'm good. I'm good. But seriously, welcome to Tri-County Church. My name's Chris. I'm one of the pastors here, and you see, we're in this series called Catchphrase, and what we wanted to do this weekend was to reflect on a life that led passionately, reflect on a life that loved deeply, reflect on a life that put God first and his family second and the church third. We wanted to reflect on who God created Dave to be and the specific mission that God sent Dave and Lori on. We also wanted to remember this past year. And you think about how quickly a year can go by, and think about this last year. And maybe for you, this last year was your first time taking a step into Tri-County Church for the very first time. And now you find yourself not only coming to Tri-County Church, you're leaning into Tri-County Church. For some of you, this last year, you went from just sitting on the sidelines. You were the consumer. You'd come to church to consume, and you found yourself over this last year moving from that consumer posture, that sideline sitting, to now you're actively engaged. You're an owner of this church. For some of you, finally, after countless hours of either listening to Dave preach or sitting with him and having him say the same things over and over and over and over and over again, you finally stopped listening to it and you started to live it out. Now you have taken all of that, and now you're pouring that into others. For some of you, this last year, you made Jesus the subject. And your life will be forever changed because of that step of faith. And for some of you, you're here for the very first time, and you walked into a pretty cool moment in the life of this church. So we wanted to reflect and we wanted to remember, but we also wanted to rest in this truth, rest in this phrase, that hope has a name. You see, for Dave, this wasn't just some catchy little phrase. This is what he gave his life to. I mean, some 21 years ago, maybe this phrase, this nice, succinct, catchy phrase, maybe wasn't in this form some 21 years ago, but the foundational thought of this phrase is what compelled Lori and Dave to follow God's leading to move to Du Bois. And you all get that the only reason why you come to Du Bois is if God makes you. Right? Like, we get that storyline. But it was this. That's why they packed up. That's why they moved away from friends, because they realized God was on the move and God had tapped them on the shoulders, and they wanted to let everyone know that hope has a name. And on January 23rd, a husband, a father, a friend, a leader, a mentor, a pastor left this earth. But you see, for Dave, he was committed to this because what he knew was this: God had given him a life. And he was going to maximize every breath of the one life God had given him to let everyone know that hope had a name. Because his hope wasn't built upon this earth. His hope was heavenward. Jesus was nearing the end of his public ministry and his earthly life. He had gathered his closest friends around him. I mean, this group had done everything together. They traveled together, they ate together, they laughed together, they cried together, they debated together. I mean, they shared deep life together. And John, probably the closest to Jesus, he recorded in what we call the Gospel of John, the story of Jesus. And so John wrote the Gospel of John. See, sometimes the Bible is complex and other times it's not. And so John's writing the story of Jesus, from his perspective. And what I love about John, when people go, where should I start reading in the Bible? I mean, I always point to one of two books, James or John. They both start with J, great books. I mean, you could also read Jeremiah. It's a great book, but a little bit more complex. So start with the other J books. And so John, what I love about John is because you can just tell this loving, caring, connecting relationship that John had with Jesus. And so John's recording this moment where Jesus had gathered his friends for the last time. And starting in chapter 13, Jesus starts into, it's kind of like his last-ditch effort to tell his friends, hey, this is the whole purpose of why we've been together. This is everything I've been saying to you, and this is what is going to come. This is what is going to happen. This is what's coming next. So Jesus starts in chapter 13, and he moves through 13, 14, 15, and 16, and you just lean in because you can just sense not just the urgency of the moment, but Jesus just wanting his friends to know, hey, everything you've sacrificed, when I asked you to leave everything and come follow me, this is what it was all about right in this moment. You could just tell Jesus saying, hey, I know you're not really going to get what really is going to unfold. I mean, they couldn't have grasped what was going to happen next. I mean, they could have grasped the arrest. They could have grasped the beating. They could grasp the public humiliation. They could even grasp at some level that their friend was going to die an excruciating death. But they could never have grasped the thought that he was going to be put into a grave, but yet he was going to conquer death. How do you... And you could just sense Jesus in these chapters. You could just sense Jesus trying to paint this picture of what's to come, even though Jesus got that they wouldn't really understand until it all unfolded. And so we're going to look at the very last thought in chapter 16, the very last thought that Jesus gives his friends. Because you see, then it turns to chapter 17. In chapter 17, Jesus kind of brings this time with his friends, this mentoring, this vision, this leadership, this discipleship moment. And then in chapter 17, he prays. He starts to pray for God the Father. He then prays for his friends, the disciples. And then he prays in this incredible turn in his prayer where he prays for all who will believe. People like you and me. And then chapter 18, he's arrested. So can you sense this moment? So in this very last thought, right before he prays and then right before he gets arrested, Jesus shares this with his group of friends. He goes, I've told you these things, okay? These things, starting in chapter 13, everything he had been saying to them, and also everything he had been saying along the way. He goes, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Because if you're sitting there, I mean, it's your friend, and you're realizing that your friend was going to leave, that there was going to be some trouble coming his way and your way. I mean, can you just imagine the anxiety? Can you imagine the emotion? Could you imagine that moment? And Jesus is like, hey, everything I've told you, I just want you to know that in everything that I've told you, what you have experienced, what you're going to experience, that I want you to have peace. See, moments before this, I don't know if it was 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, I don't know. But in this same kind of moment from chapter 13 through 16, Jesus talked about this peace. And this is what he said in John chapter 14. He goes, peace I leave with you, and my peace I give you. And what a beautiful moment. See, the disciples would have quickly gone back to this when Jesus said to them in chapter 16, hey, my peace is with you. They would have gone back quickly to this when Jesus said, hey, my peace I leave you. You see, up to this point, Jesus' presence had been their peace. Think about it. When they encountered the tough questions from the religious elite trying to trap them, guess who answered the questions? Jesus. And when the crowds gathered around them and came after them, who was their leader to lead them out? Jesus. When the waves started to crash into their boats and they were scared for their lives, who calmed the waves? Jesus. When they didn't know what to do next, guess who was there to navigate their next steps? Jesus. You see, Jesus' presence was their peace. And now Jesus was saying to them, hey, I'm leaving you. Hey, I'm not going to be here. Hey, what's to come is going to be devastating for you here on earth. But I want you to know something. That I'm leaving you my peace. I might not be present physically, but I'm leaving you my peace. And not only am I leaving you my peace, it's a gift. It's a gift. I mean, we talk about God being a generous God. I hope you know that that's just one of these incredible storylines throughout the entire Bible. God, a giving God. God, a generous God. And here yet again, what a generous God. And then Jesus quickly kind of qualifies it. He goes, I do not give to you as the world gives. So how does the world give? How do you and I sometimes give? With conditions? With strings attached? With gotchas? Jesus is like, no, I'm not giving you my peace like the world does. My peace doesn't have like a gotcha. My peace doesn't have strings all attached. My peace doesn't have conditions. It's free. It's a gift. No strings, no gotchas, no conditions. It's for you. It's for you. And he says, do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. And, I think about every one of his friends sitting in this circle. I'm sure their eyes said it all. How afraid they really were, how unsure they really were, how troubled they really were. So we go back to verse 33. He goes, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. And then he said, in this world you will have trouble. Now in chapter 14, he says, hey, don't let your hearts be troubled. But now he's just saying, hey, so guess what? In this world, there's going to be trouble. In this world, the path you're going to navigate, and this is something we all get, don't we? I mean, there's trouble in our world. And what's cool with this word trouble, you see, just moments before he shared this, he gave this very kind of vivid illustration, an illustration we get to this day. Some 2,000 years later, we're going to get this illustration. This was his illustration. He said this, a woman giving birth to a child has pain. And if you're a woman who gave birth, right, that's the understatement of the day, right? You're like, yeah, okay, pain, right? Because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. Now, when my wife was pregnant, we'd gone into the hospital. It was about that time for her to give birth, and it was so exciting, and to be able to go through the process and the whole thing. And we found ourselves in the hospital, and she's having contractions, and it was our second child, but it was our first time experiencing that, and some of you know that story. And so anyway, and so it was interesting because it was like I'm a first-time dad, even though we have an older daughter, and she's hooked up to all of these really cool machines, and I'm just like, this is awesome. And I start looking at the machine, and what's amazing with these machines is they tell you when the contractions are coming and to what severity of contraction. You know what I mean? So I found myself watching it, and I would start saying, hey, honey, here one comes, here one comes. Oh, this one's going to be bad. Oh, really bad. And then she would scream, like, ah, in pain. And then another one I'd see, I go, here's another one. Oh, you thought the last one was bad? This one's really bad, And at that point, she started to share with me exactly what she thought about me, which I can't reveal to all of you. And I realized I'm probably not being helpful, but I mean, these machines are so cool, It's amazing, right? There's pain, right? There's pain that comes with childbirth. And as I was thinking about that this week as well, I was thinking about that moment, and then, this is just a glimpse inside my brain, and it's a scary, scary, dark place, so don't spend too much thinking about this. But I started thinking to myself, I'm like, well, I wonder when the epidural was created. Have you ever wondered that? I did. I'm like, where did that come from, right? And then I thought to myself, I wonder who the first woman who actually volunteered to try it out. Oh, yeah, stick me with that needle. Go for it, right? Like someone had to be the first. So I Googled, and I started reading about it. And, I found out it was like in the 1970s is when the epidural became, most widely used. That's only the last 40, 50 years. Yeah. I mean, for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years of humanity, I mean, there wasn't an epidural for pain management when it came to childbirth. And I know a few of you were, you're like, oh, natural, forget pain management. You want to, and I high five you, right? If I was a woman, I would just say, give me every pain medication ever, I'm just letting you know, right? And Jesus is like, hey, there's pain. And we're all like, yeah, we get that. There's pain. And then he uses this word anguish because she forgets the anguish because her joy is that the child is born. And that's true. It's like all of a sudden, that moment when you hear the child scream, and it's just like, it's amazing in that moment. And this word anguish that he uses there is the same Greek word that he used for the word trouble. Same word. And so when he says, hey, in this world you will have trouble, you will have anguish, you will have pain. It's going to happen. One moment you wake up and life is headed one way, and then all of a sudden it takes this dramatic shift. You have a storyline scripted for your life, and you're really excited about how that storyline that you're scripting for your life, or maybe even what you thought God had scripted for your life, and you're excited to see how that's going to play out, and all of a sudden those pages are ripped out. My wife and I call these trouble moments, we call them plot twists. You know, any great movie, any great book has that plot twist, right? You think the storyline's going one way, you think you have it figured out, and all of a sudden you flip a page and plot twist. And we've actually had moments before in our life as we've been navigating through difficult seasons of life. We've actually said that out loud. We're like, well, we guess that's a plot twist. Didn't see that coming in our life. I mean, for the disciples, Jesus' friends, I mean, they're leaning in at this moment going, we thought we had it all figured out, but this is not what we had figured out. And what's to come, we're still not sure if we've figured out what's to come. Plot twist. You know that morning you wake up to go to work and you get the email that your store, your plant is closing? Plot twist. Your marriage is moving right along, and then all of a sudden you discover plot twist. A friendship that has been connected for such a long time, then all of a sudden you realize the foundation of trust that you thought was there, all of a sudden you find something that crumbles that foundation. Plot twist. You wake up on a Saturday morning, and it's another Saturday filled with things to do and people to see. And then you get the phone call. You receive the message. That Dave has passed. Plot twist. In this world, you will have trouble. You'll have moments where you think it's headed one way, and then all of a sudden, plot twist, it's headed another way. And in this moment, you can just tell for this group of friends that had given everything to follow Jesus, even though they really didn't understand what they were getting into, but they still were walking with faith. In this moment, they're leaning in and they're still trying to wrap their brains around everything Jesus had just said to them. And he's like, hey, you will have peace, and in this world, you will have trouble. And then all of a sudden, I mean, Jesus could have ended it right there, but he doesn't. He's going to say one more thing, okay? One more thing. And in my mind, I think this is what happened. Like, Jesus is going to say this next thing. He's going to take a microphone and drop it. He's going, boom. And he walks off the stage. I mean, again, in my mind, that's what's going to happen, okay? So imagine that, okay? All of a sudden, then he drops this line. He goes, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Mic drop. Bam. I mean, like, we're like, yeah. The disciples were like, huh? He said, no, you got to understand. The brokenness of this world, I've overcome. The trouble of this world, overcome. Because what's going to unfold next is for everyone. What Jesus was about to do was extend his love and his grace for everyone who would believe in him. He says, yeah, on this world there's trouble. On this world it's broken. In this world it's fractured. Get it. But guess what? I've overcome the world. That's why our hope isn't about anything here on this planet. It's all heavenward. And that's why for Dave, guess what he knew? He knew the one life that God had placed in his hands. He wanted everyone to know that hope had a name, because his hope wasn't about this earth. Even though there's grief and loss that you have to navigate through this thought, know that he knew. You see, our hope can't be placed on who the president is or who the president will be. Our hope can't be placed on who our boss is or who our boss will be. Our hope can't be placed on who we're married to or who you want to marry. Our hope can't be placed about who was the lead pastor, is the lead pastor, will be the lead pastor of God's church. Our hope has to be in the one who overcomes the world. Dave had been traveling over to Israel, and it's an amazing experience. And if you've never been, I just challenge you. You got to go. I mean, it's an investment, I get, but I tell you, it brings the Bible alive in ways that is so hard to articulate. And he had gone, and that's what happened for him. And as he came back, he was meeting with the team, and the team was just discussing, I mean, when you travel anywhere, it's hard, but when you travel that distance, you know, you're away from home, so you never sleep that well, and you're on buses, and then on the plane on the way back, and there's a time change, and the team was just kind of gathered around Dave. They're like, hey, we know you've been traveling, you've just come back, you're tired from travel, and on that Saturday, that morning, there was this race that he was running, and the race is called the Frozen Sno. And I've thought to myself, why couldn't they name that something different? Like the Barbarian Warrior Run of Doom. Like that's cool, right? You're like, come on. But the Frozen Snot is like, But he was running the Frozen Snot, and so they knew that, and so they just suggested, hey, why don't we record your message on video? Just if you're too tired to come back and preach, we'll have it ready. And here's what you need to know, and maybe you're new to Tri-County, or maybe you've been around for a while, you just forget this fact, but you know, we're one church in many locations. We have a Clearfield campus right now, they're meeting. We have a downtown campus right now, they're meeting. We're meeting here on the hill. We have people online watching around the country. And so for everyone else, they're watching the teaching on video. That's just what they know. And so they just said, hey, let's record it, and if you're tired, you just take the weekend on, and we'll play the video, you know, for all the campuses, but even for on the hill. And so he said, sure, let's do that. And he had been working on this message, and the title of the message that he recorded on Friday, the 22nd of January, was What Leaders Leave Behind. I want you to know, because on the 23rd, Dave left this world. It didn't take God by surprise. I hope you know that. In the midst of loss and grief and that hole that was created with his departure, I want you to know, it didn't take, God wasn't shocked. You see, God had been working within Dave's soul to the level that he pre-recorded a message focused on what leaders leave behind. And at the very end of that message, and we showed a short clip, this is what he shared. Someday, I will not be the lead pastor of this church. And someday, this church will be led by a completely different group of people. And someday, those others who are being led will lead yet another generation of people who are following Jesus. Someday. And where everyone thought that someday was going to be years and years and years and years later. That someday ended up being the next day. You see, when Dave and Lori packed up their cars and moved to Du Bois, they didn't ever think this was going to happen, that it'd be a church this size and multiple sites and online. They didn't move to Du Bois to grow a big church. I mean, just ask them. I mean, the first Sunday, they don't think they ever envisioned this. But what they were absolutely committed to doing was living like Jesus lived and loving like he loved and leaving behind what Jesus left behind, which is more people who live like Jesus lived, love like he loved, and leave behind what Jesus left behind, which was living like Jesus lived, loving like he loved, and leaving behind what Jesus left behind. You see, Dave had positioned this church to be so much more than about him. He never wanted this church to be about him. He never wanted this church to be about him. And that's why today we can not only reflect on his life, we can remember the faithfulness of God this past year. Why? Because you guys grasp onto the truth that our call isn't just to go to church, it's to be the church. And when we are the church, we live like Jesus lived, we love like he loves, and we leave behind what Jesus left behind, which is more people. See, churches thrive when we realize it's about being the church everywhere we go. It's about the church. See, next weekend we land on our last phrase, which is simply be the church. For every one of us in this room and watching online, when you hear the word church, there's a whole list of perspectives and descriptions attached to the word church, isn't there? I mean, for some of you, the first time you walked into Tri-County Church, I mean, you knew we were a church, but you left going, what was that? I mean, you're like, they were having fun. I mean, there was a band and drums and lights and screens, and it was loud, and people were laughing, and it looked like people liked each other. I mean, there's a whole list, right? There's a whole list of perspectives that started to deconstruct what you thought church was about. How you were raised with the concept of church and religion, because you slap religion next to the word church, and this becomes even more complicated, doesn't it? So next week, we're going to try to together deconstruct all of our perspectives of what church means in our mind and try to reconstruct what Jesus meant the church to be about. And that's why we rest in the phrase to be the church. Because again, Dave and Lori didn't give their lives to build a big church. I hope you get that. They didn't have a goal set, number one, big church. They wanted to tell everyone that Jesus is the subject and hope is his name. That we are called to love everyone. No matter if it lines up to what we think a person should act or what a person should say, or if their values line up with our values, that our love is to extend to everyone. And as we move through life, we are to be the church, not go to church. We are to live out, living like Jesus lived, loving like he loved, and leaving behind what he left behind, because that is being the church. And yes, you still have to come next week, even though I'm giving you the Cliff Notes. And that's why the communities of DuBois and St. Mary's and Punxsutawney and Clearfield and Brockaway and Brookville and Weedville. You're all impressed, aren't you? Yeah, I know. That's why these communities will be forever changed. Be forever changed. About 10 years ago, and if you ask my wife, she'll probably disagree with the timeline, but that's okay. I have the microphone. And 10 years ago, she bought me this birthday present. I had wanted this, by the way, full. I wanted this. I wanted an herb garden. Seriously, I wanted one, and I wanted to grow herbs. I love to cook, and I'm like, I want fresh herbs, and so it was on my birthday list. So she bought me an herb garden, and when I opened it, I was excited at first because I was like, yes, I got an herb garden. But I looked at it, and her heart was great, but it was a really janky herb garden. I was like, I know. I'm just letting you know. Okay. And I'm not saying that was the right husband move. I'm just telling you the real story. And so I looked at her, I'm like, thank you, honey, for trying. But so we took it back. And over the last 10 years, it's okay. I know. Honey, I'm sorry. Okay. And so we took it back. And so over the last 10 years, it's been kind of this joke about trying to find a really cool herb garden. And we've gotten close, and we haven't found one. And so just a couple weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were at Home Goods in State College, and we stumbled upon this really cool herb garden. And we're like, yeah, that's it. It was so exciting. And she goes, is that good enough? I'm like, yeah, that one's good enough, right? And so we bought it, and let me kind of lower the expectations. It's not really a garden. It's 4 really cool glass jars, right? So it's kind of an herb jarage. And so we got it out, and there was, not even 4 herbs. There was 3 herbs, and, I'll get to the 4th one in a second. So we planted the oregano. That was one of the herbs. We planted the parsley. That's another herb. We planted the cilantro, and then the last one was a jalapeno. And I'm like, not an herb, but we'll still take it because, hey, why not? You always need jalapenos. And so we planted them, and the girls got really excited, and we started talking about, how plants grow and the whole process. And so, it kind of got excited. So we waited and waited for the plants to start to, break through the soil. And all of a sudden, one day, the parsley started to grow, and the oregano started to grow, and the cilantro started to grow. And we were all excited. We're like, yeah, look at them grow. And they're growing. They're getting bigger. And every morning, the girls water them, or Claire just takes a little water, and she goes, they're just a little thirsty. So we're having this moment every morning. But Mr. Jalapeno wasn't growing. Oh, it's devastating. We're like, at first it was like, maybe it's just a late bloomer, right? We're just waiting. And a week's gone by, and the other plants are doing great, but Mr. Jalapeno is like nothing. And then one morning, I woke up early. I walked down to our kitchen, and, I'm looking at the plants because now we're all like leaning in because now like our heart, we're like, what's going on with Mr. Jalapeno? And all of a sudden, I peer into the jar, and guess what I see sticking up through the soil? Mr. Jalapeno. So at the top of my lungs, I scream, Mr. Jalapeno! The girls come running downstairs, like, what, Dad? I'm like, Mr. Jalapeno is growing, right? And so now, since that moment, every morning when we're looking at the plants, when we get to Mr. Jalapeno, you know what we do? We scream, Mr. Jalapeno! So here's my challenge for all of you. Next time you're in the grocery store and you see a jalapeno, just scream that. It's fun. I mean, it's going to release some angst in your, I mean, I'm just telling you, when you see them, it's and I guess you could also scream Mrs. Jalapeno, right? I'm fine with Mrs. Jalapeno as well. Okay. And so what's amazing is, like, as these plants have been growing, when we planted the oregano seeds, guess what's growing? Oregano, right? Not shocking. When we planted the cilantro seeds in the cilantro jar, guess what's growing? Cilantro. When we planted the, you are listening. I mean, I know some of you checked out and are like, oh, this story just won't stop. Does he have a point? I'm hungry. Come on. It has a point. Yeah, the parsley, guess what's growing? Parsley. And Mr. Jalapeno, guess what's growing? Mr. Jalapeno. It's amazing, right? And here's this such important truth. What is planted always grows. And I want you to know, what was planted 21 years ago, that this church is going to be the church, that this church is going to be committed to introducing people to who Jesus is, because Jesus is our hope, that this church isn't just going to be content with staying where it is, but it's going to go into every community possible so that people know that Jesus is the subject and hope is his name, that this is going to be a church that extends love to everyone, that this is a church that's committed not just going to church, but being the church, that this church, what was planted some 21 years ago, will continue to grow into every community we go into, because what's planted always grows. Amen? We're not going to get everything right. But what we are going to get right, we're not going to allow these phrases to become catchphrases. We're not going to get everything right. But what we are as a church is going to be committed to the things that were important to Jesus. Let's pray. Lord, I know in the midst of this room, the loss is real of a friend, of a loved one, of a pastor. And Lord, where I never had the opportunity to meet Dave, I'm so thankful because I feel like I have. Because of what he left behind. I'm so thankful for this church, this group of people. They're so committed to living and loving how you lived and loved, and so committed to leaving behind what you left behind. And Jesus, we're so thankful that you overcame the world. And Heavenly Father, you, even in the midst of the moments of our lives where we just want to scream plot twist, Lord, we know that you are such a good Father. In your name we pray.